Today's American Society of State Colleges and Universities and the Society for College and University Planning presentation is titled Conflict Resolution in Academic Departments. Let me take just a moment to introduce John Hamming, today's moderator. John is the Director of Special Projects and Development for the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, known by the acronym ASCU. His diverse work experience spans a variety of roles in the community college, a state comprehensive university, and also at ASCU. He has led a number of national products and is ASCU's lead staff person for the Voluntary System of Accountability's College Portrait. And John, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome you to the program. The audience is all yours.
On behalf of ASCU and SCUP, we want to extend a warm welcome to all of the higher education leaders in our audience today. We hope each of you find value in your time with us. During this program, we want to help you think about conflicts and what you can do to help yourself or others who are engaged in a conflict. During the presentation, Dr. Cheldelin will pose several questions to the audience that will allow you to respond either by interactive poll or by calling in or text response via the question and answer box on your webinar screen. Following her presentation, we'll take time to get to as many of your questions, either text or call in as possible. Before I introduce our presenter, Dick, would you please again explain to the audience how polling and the Q&A sessions will work?
Yes, thank you. And as I mentioned before, if you have a question or a comment at any time during the program, all you have to do is press star and the number 1 on your telephone's keypad, and that will put you into our question queue. And then as your name comes up, then we'll call on you by the name of your city. And also, you'll see in a moment, you'll be asked 2 questions that we would like you to respond to. And I will ask the question, and you'll see the answers to choose from. And simply click on the radio button by the colored square block that best expresses your answers, and you'll be able to understand that more clearly when those slides come up. John?
Thank you. Let's move right into the program and meet today's presenter. Sandra Cheldelin is widely experienced in higher education, both as a faculty member and as an administrator. Before coming to George Mason University's Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution as a faculty member, and a period of time where she served as the director of the Institute, she spent time as director of educational development, a dean, and as a provost. She's also worked with ASCU as a team member helping to redevelop the higher education system in Liberia following that country's devastating civil war. Her grasp of organizational dynamics is world-class, and her training as a licensed psychologist has allowed her to be successful as a consultant addressing difficult conflicts in academic departments. With that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everybody. For those of us who are very snow-weary, I hope this will be an interesting and useful distraction. Today we're going to talk about conflict in academic departments, and let me begin by asking you if it has gone this far. Hopefully not. And actually usually not, because working with academics means you are usually working with very smart people. And what's interesting about very smart people is that they can get far more devious in their strategies than this kind of overt hostile response to anger. John mentioned that we're going to be having, I actually have 2 questions that I would like for you to respond to. And let me begin by putting conflict into your mind's eye. And of these 2 questions, they are forced choice. So I've put together some likely quick scenarios to make it easier for you to decide. So the first one is, what was most commonly used in your family? Some of you may say, there wasn't any conflict in our family. Others might say, we got the silent treatment. Or there was lots of screaming and yelling and blaming. There was violence. We engaged in lengthy discussions over what the issues were. It typically responded to issues of power. I'm not sure that we can put another category in there, or you can have a no vote. But of those the ones of no conflict, silent treatment, screaming, violence, lengthy discussions, and power, I'd like for you now to vote on those, and we'll be going over the results of that pretty soon. The other question I have for you is, when I say the word conflict, what comes, oops, I lost my slide here.
We need to leave that slide open for just a moment for everyone to have an opportunity.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And as you're voting, just click on either the red or the blue or yellow, whatever the color is, square, or the radio button that precedes that. And go ahead. We're going to leave this open for just a few more seconds, so go ahead and make your choice now. And with that, Sandra, I think just go ahead and move to the next one.
Okay. You may have to help me come back to this. So now I want you to be thinking about the word conflict and what comes to mind when I say the word conflict. Some of you might immediately go to, there's a lot of pain, suffering, some kind of physical response, stomach aches, and the like. Others take a big breath and say, oh, it's so hard, it's so stressful. Or it's quite annoying and I want to have nothing to do with it. Or, goody, this is an opportunity to work things out. And of course, you can not vote if you so choose. So I'll leave this up for a second, and if you could identify those. What comes to your mind when I say the word conflict?
Yeah, we'll leave this open for a few more moments to let people think about that.
Okay.
So that we can actually get an accurate vote of what the audience actually thinks. And it does actually appear that we have gotten all of the votes that we're going to get.
All right. Now, finally, I'd like you to think of a conflict at your university, in your college, in your department, or within the group, like a dean's meeting or a president's council or the faculty senate. And over the past 3 months, I want you to be thinking about these conflicts, who are involved, and what is your particular role. And as we go through this information about conflict and conflict resolution and conflict management, I'd like you to have this as in your mind's eye of what your own firsthand experience, because hopefully what we can do is to make this really relevant to the situation that you are in right now. Let's see, I'm trying to get this to move down one. Here we go. Okay, now let's go back to your family. Question was your family of origin. What did you learn about conflict? And here are the results. 14% of you said there was no conflict in our family, or little conflict in the family. 42% of you said the silent treatment. That, by the way, is a very common response. Usually the most common response is the silent treatment, and we all sort of learned about how awful that is. Almost 30% of you said there was screaming, yelling, and blaming. There was no violence in the group. That's nice. And 14% said there were lengthy discussions. So the most common one there is the silent treatment, and then the screaming and yelling and blaming, and then the lengthy discussions.
Sandra, excuse me just a moment. Before you go on to the next one, I had several people that have emailed us a comment here that they were not able to vote on this particular screen. And so I'm going to open it up once more. I'm sorry to delay. And please go ahead and make your selections now. And I see now they're really starting to roll in. So I'm sorry for that delay.
No problem.
And there's
while folks are voting, perhaps I could make a few comments about what we learned in our family of origin. There's obviously isn't just one way to navigate a conflict. I find actually in American culture that we have two pretty typical responses to conflict. We either avoid or we use extreme aggression. And we're not very skilled, nor do we see much practice of what goes on in between. So now we can go to what comes to mind. See where we are now. What comes to mind with conflict? And the results from the audience on conflict for this question is that no one said that conflict brings on a physical response of any kind of pain or suffering. But 68, almost 70% of you said conflict is hard and it's stressful, and 20% of you said it's annoying, and 12% of you said it's goody. It's an opportunity to work things out. I happen to be, by the way, one of those odd ducks who would score this as number 4, that goody, this is an opportunity to work things out. But that didn't happen. That happened over time. That isn't something that came easily, and I'd like to see if we can actually be thinking about how you can think of other ways of responding to conflict to kind of develop the underdeveloped skills that you have already there. Conflict is hard to talk about for any number of reasons. Interestingly, once you do raise the issue, everyone knows what you're talking about. In protracted or contentious departments or groups or units, when they it seems like this elephant becomes bigger and bigger and bigger in the room, especially when the issues are not dealt with, and we get better and better about dancing around it, but it doesn't make it go away. So I always find that the New Yorker captures really the issues pretty well, and I think this is one of my favorites. I'm right there in the room, and no one even acknowledges me, which is probably saying that it needs to be acknowledged. Well, one reason conflict is so hard is because we have all experienced it, and particularly its destructive side. If you go back to your case on your campuses within the past 3 months, ask these questions. Are feelings undermined at this point? Are you attending to issues other than what you should be doing? Is the cohesiveness of the group fractured? Do you now have cliques or cabals or factions or people who are identified as the unacceptable other? When conflict is destructive, it plays itself out as a group lacking cooperation. It discourages people from open participation because they don't know where they're going to get killed. It deepens differences rather than embraces them. And too often, at least one person, usually more, engages in behavior that they later regret. Likely something like this may be going on in your own cases, on your own campuses, and we can talk about that at the end if you'd like. Let me go to the next slide. You may recall I said I selected number 4, oh goody, that when I see a conflict, and that might be a bit of an overstatement, but not so much in groups. Actually, I think groups need conflict, as it's both inevitable, so it's nice to have that's one thing to need it if it's going to happen anyway. It always it also has ways for us to develop growth and change. And so here are some of the characteristics of conflicts when they are constructive. And as I go through these, I want you to consider again your own conflict on your own campuses, or perhaps easier, think of a conflict that's been resolved in your unit or department. This might be easier to find the constructive parts of conflict, because usually when we're in the thick of conflict, we only think of its destructive parts. So, as usually conflicts, when they work, when I say goody, this is a conflict, it will ultimately encourage open discussion. It will allow full exploration of the concerns of the group. It gives people an opportunity to say what's on their mind, particularly if they're ticked off about something, like, I totally disagree with this. It gives them a chance to say that, as opposed to saying it in the hallway or triangulating it with somebody else outside. Hopefully, if it's done right and the conflict emerges and you work it through, you can come up with a solution that everyone can agree upon. Constructive conflict builds cohesiveness. It supports the belief that you can solve this. You've survived it in the past. Of course, we can do this again. We've had hard issues that we've dealt with in the past. It builds authentic kinds of communication, and it builds confidence in each other. And perhaps some of you can think of some other ways that conflict can be very constructive. The word comes from Latin. It's conflictus, and it means striking together with force, which implies disagreement or friction among people. As in, let's say, when our words or our behavior or our feelings strike together, causing disagreement. One way to think about conflict in our academy is when our actions or beliefs are unacceptable to, and therefore almost always resisted by, the others in the unit, whether it's in the dean's meeting or in the budget meeting and so on. Conflict will raise its lovely head when we want things, when we want different things but have to settle for the same thing, or when we want the same things but we have to settle for different things. This was a definition that was developed by Clyde Coombs in April of 1987, and it's pretty simple, and it actually captures most of what's going on in conflict, but it's not very helpful or realistic in the academy. So I particularly like this one in terms of a definition of conflict. When we think about members of our unit or group where we are dependent on one another, so that's the interdependent piece, even if we don't want to be, we are the faculty in the department, and the department has to have a faculty, even though I wish I didn't have to be part of this faculty, or we are the budget decision makers, and the university has to have such a group, even though I find this group totally annoying, or we are the department chairs, and though this is yet another meeting I must attend, there are reasons why departments have chairs. So we are interdependent, and so we meet, and this is what we find. We have incompatible goals in the group, or there are scarce resources, which is almost always the case, or we feel interference from others in getting what it is that we want. And when those things happen, we have conflict. I put a note there saying that it's probably fairly important to notice that transforming a conflict then, which we're going to get to soon, how do you deal with the conflict, will depend on perceptual changes in one or more of the parties, because this is really a struggle that is perceived as incompatible goals or scarce resources or interference from the other. Let's see, I think I went too far here. So there are mechanisms that can change disagreements into conflicts, and you can have disagreements and still not have a conflict. But when it moves to conflict, it's usually because people perceive there are scarce resources and they compete for them. Or it becomes a conflict when people start using threatening and contentious patterns of influence, of forcing their agenda on someone else's. Or when they get personal and start using characteristics about the person's age or gender or sexual orientation or race or abilities. And usually those personal characteristics are said in negative tones. So when you have disagreements, you can move them to conflicts if these kinds of things occur. Conflict almost always has a process, and it is actually pretty predictable. It starts usually with a disagreement, and there are attributions or misperceptions that are attributed to the other party. And then there becomes a commitment, often to different positions on how to proceed. There is a special form of escalation that occurs when you get trapped. And you'll probably have experienced this in your own groups, where too much energy and too much time and too many resources are going on the same problem and the same problem week after week or month after month. And it's not dealt with, and people get pretty hostile, which moves to the next phase of that. And so then aggression starts showing up, or sarcasm may come first. A good way to note where you are in this conflict is that when you leave your room or leave the meeting and you go out and talk to your friends, or you go home and talk to your family members, and all they ever hear is about this particular group. There might be some kind of reciprocity. Well, you know, I deserve to treat him that way because that's the way he or she treated me. And usually conflict really is well established when you've got a little coalition that's formed, where these 3 people are against those 4 people, or you find yourself trying to form a coalition. Christopher Moore has done a really lovely job, I think, in identifying, looks like a very complicated slide, and it's not, identifying issues and causes of conflict. And I think this is really, these are pretty well represented in the Academy. There are different types of disputes or conflicts. There's a data dispute, relationships, structural, I'm going around the circle, structural conflicts, values, and interests. In data conflicts, the sources that it usually causes that is lack of information or misinformation, or there's different perspectives on the relevance of the information. In relationship conflicts, there are usually strong emotions. These are oftentimes happens in departments, in academic departments with faculty, or there are misperceptions, oftentimes stereotypes, poor communication, repetitive negative behavior, the curmudgeon who's always the curmudgeon, and people sort of work around the curmudgeon. I'm going to come back to the structural conflict. Let me talk about the values conflict next. These are really some of the hardest conflicts to deal with because they typically are based in some ideology or religious or value-based, and people are typically committed, or they're closer to the sense of themselves and their identity, and so those are harder to reconcile. Interest conflicts, whether they're perceived or actual differences in interest, there's usually competition in the substantive, procedural, psychological interests that are going on there. And then structural conflicts usually has some power and authority that's dealing with it, where there is destructive patterns of behavior, unequal control, unequal access to control over their own behaviors or other people's behaviors. And the reason that I like this, I haven't done justice to Chris Moore's process here, or framework he's got here, but the reason I like it is because when you are in the middle of a conflict, it's useful to think in terms of what is going on here. And you can first start with saying, is this a dispute around data? Do we have bad data? Do we disagree on the data? Is this a dispute that's interpersonal? Is it all around relationships? Are there things that are going on that are structurally wrong? Is the organization designed wrong? Do they have the wrong people in the wrong types of positions, and so on? So this is another way of sort of thinking about the causes in conflict. This is a very simple strategy that I use all the time, and I find it, what I like about it is that it's a way of getting people to get outside of themselves. When you think in terms of a dual concern model, and this goes back to our preferences of how we like to deal with conflict, how we learned about dealing with conflict from our family of origin. And there are the reason this is so simple is what am I doing to get my own needs met, and what am I doing to help get others get their needs met? And so Thomas Kilmann came up with a fancy little instrument called the Thomas Kilmann Preferences for Handling Conflict. And it fits nicely in this dual concern model, looking like this. And so the instrument will tell you whether or not it's you prefer avoiding, staying away from conflict, some of you said that, or you like to compete, and they're very aggressive, and there's violence and yelling and that sort of thing. Or there's accommodating, which is sort of like, okay, I'm gonna let you get your needs met, and I'm not going to get my own needs met. One of the problems with accommodating is that these people oftentimes keep track, but they don't keep track near as much as compromisers do. So compromising is, we all know it's sort of we give and take. You'll notice it's halfway up. I get some of my needs met, and they're going to get some of their needs met. And compromise works in the sense that it looks like people are trying to be cooperative. So you'll notice on the bottom line, we're looking at levels of cooperativeness, and going up, we're looking at levels of assertiveness. Let me take a little moment to explain a compromise. My husband and I have a date every Friday night, and we usually go to the movies. And we like different kinds of movies. So he might like these kind of artsy-fartsy kinds, and I might like really blockbusters or popular things. And so he'll say something like, well, I'd really like to go see Blue Valentine tonight. So I would say, okay, that sounds good, because I know that last week I got to see my movie. And what happens with this is that it works, because ultimately what we want to do is spend time together, and Friday night stops work. But it is clearly compromise, and it plays itself out when all of a sudden too many artsy movies get selected, or too many big blockbusters get selected, and the other person says, oh, wait a minute. So in dealing with conflict, I say that only because whenever we vote, and 50% or 60% say this and 40% say that, it's a type of compromise. But people keep track if they are losing. And so, but you cannot get to collaboration without the skills of compromising, where you actually do get your own needs met part way, and the others get their needs met part way. And ultimately, in collaboration, at the end of it, everybody feels like they fully got their needs met. And that takes a lot more time, but is ultimately useful. So let's talk about strategies for managing conflict. So you all have conflicts in your mind of what goes on in your own campuses. Probably the first thing to do in terms of managing conflict is to anticipate potential conflicts. As we work with our colleagues, and many of us work with the same colleagues over years, we get to know them pretty well, and we know their hot buttons. We know if we're going to present this, that the students are going to like this, or the faculty are not going to like this, or the chairs are going to like this, and so on. So if we anticipate potential conflicts, we can actually do some homework ahead of time. We also need to be intentional about providing a process to deal with conflicts. And the process can be it can be implicit and explicit, but there needs to be a process that people are familiar with and find comfortable to use. Let's go back to anticipating potential conflicts. I could say I'm going to present the notion that we have to increase tuition this year. Some of you are dealing with that. And of course, if I ask students, what do you think about this? They're all going to say no. But if we provide a process in which we say, I want to call some town halls, we did talk about tuition, it's really not good that we have the students having to increase their tuition, but we want to explain the reasons of what's going on, and we want you to have an opportunity to talk to us about it. Then what you're doing is creating a process for them to deal with conflict. The next step, another strategy, is that old elephant in the room. What if we said something like, the meeting's going on, and we say, seems to me like every meeting the last 3 weeks, we've been having this issue come up. And when it does, we disagree, and we disagree with the same narrative. So maybe it would make sense for us to just say that there's a conflict going on here. What should we do about that? And name it, and then move to the next one where you use some problem solving. And I have, or AI, appreciative inquiry, which is a model. If we have some time, I'll get into that. But we're all familiar with problem solving, so I'll stick with problem solving. Sort of what is the problem, and we go through a problem solving mode. I have a slide on some of those steps. And in all the times for strategies for managing conflicts, we've got to be effective in our communication skills. And what that usually comes down to is listen, listen, and listen. Listen some more, and then try to say what it is that you hear the other person saying before you have a response already made, before they get it half out. Okay, so skills that are needed in order to handle conflict. Communication, just what I was saying, listening, paraphrasing, reframing what's going on. It's okay to disagree if you feel like you've been heard. And empathy, I don't think anyone can have enough empathy skills in terms of good communication. Building trust, having some history together and calling it saying, I really like the way we worked that through. I know it was hard. all of those around good communication skills. There are also lots of good techniques for anger management. And learning strategies for anger management. There's taking time out, stopping the meeting, saying, okay, we're now engaged in behavior that we're later going to regret. Let's take time out for this. Or let's all take a break, and we'll come back and revisit this. If you can discover the nugget of gold in what the other person is saying, even if what they're saying seems so far-fetched, start with the nugget. Say, I really agree that we need to think about this differently. And I was thinking about it in A, B, and C ways. But if you can find something in which you're trying to connect with what it is they're saying. Going back to that dual concern model of getting your own needs met and getting their needs met, you're in a negotiation. And if you can actually negotiate where both of you can get your needs met and get into problem solving, it will ultimately become less personal. And I'm going to skip the appreciative inquiry right now just because I want to make sure we get through all of this, but I'd like to come back to that if there is any extra time. So let me move this. This is a simple little continuum kind of framework to think about your options if you've got conflict going on in the academy. And you'll see it's broken down. First on the left side, there's informal, and on the right side, it's formal. On the left side, it's consensual. People are trying to seek consensus. On the right side, it tends to be positional. To the extent that you can in a conflict, keep it on the left side and keep it in negotiation or facilitation. That would be, most conflicts get resolved that way. Most conflicts get resolved well that way. Mediation usually brings in a third party in which the third party could be, there are any number of possible third parties. We can talk about that in a few minutes. But if you can get people to negotiate something where they can both get their needs met, or if you can bring a group together and start facilitating problem solving around some of their issues, if they can't solve them, bring in a third party, an external consultant, whatever, to have them work it through before it ever gets to the point where it gets into the legal system or the contract systems, or if you've got like union contracts, then you're going to be into the kind of arbitration, adjudication, and so on. So my recommendation in higher education is try to keep systems as much as possible to the left, but always have an opportunity for people to go the next step. So you didn't anticipate the conflict. You're in the middle of a conflict, and you're going, oh, my God, what am I going to do now? So first thing that I recommend is that you do some kind of assessment. What is going on right here? And to do that, I go back to the definition of a conflict. Clarify communication. Is there an expressed struggle going on? What are the perceptions? How are people constructing their reality? Do they perceive incompatible goals? Let's start with that. What do you see as the goals here? Are these goals incompatible? Do you perceive scarce resources? If there are scarce resources, what can we do to make it as palatable as possible? Do you perceive interference from others? And then ask directly to the group, what's going on? Tell others what your own reality is. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I was feeling great when I walked into this room. Right now, 30 minutes later, I feel like I could hardly wait to get out of here. How are you folks feeling? And also to look for evidence where I say there's shades of gray. Look for places where there is, it's not so dualistic. It's not so yes and no, up and down, right and wrong. I'm good, you're bad. But is there some areas where you folks could find some compromise? You never get to the place where you are in higher education unless you're a good problem solver. And I think that's true even for our students. They wouldn't be going to college to learn problem-solving skills. And so basics of problem solving. Define and analyze the problem. We have a conflict going on here. Let's figure out what the problem is. And actually, an interesting thing happens when people move from experiencing the conflict to trying to solve the conflict is they move over to that little left brain of theirs and they get into why are we in this pickle that we're in? And they're into their analytical skills. What kind of information do we need to gather? What are some options we could do that would help us all out? We let's select this option, and then we'll move ahead with that. So problem-solving model, we all have those skills, and that's one of the easiest ways to address conflict. What's very commonly used and almost never has institutional support in the academy is the informal peacemaker. Deborah Kolb is the person who came up with this language that I know of anyway on informal peacemakers. And this is where a lot of management of conflict, and it works something like this. I'm in a meeting, I get hopping mad, I go into my office of my friend, of my colleague that I just adore because I really trust him or her, and I say, can you believe that so-and-so did such and such? And that person moves it to, oh, you must have been really upset, and why do you think they did that? Do you think something else is going on? And pretty soon they have moved me out of my huffing, puffing, angry state to helping me think that there might be another way of doing this. And I know that in your department you have a peacemaker, or in your unit you have a peacemaker, and formalizing that isn't going to make them do it more or better, but acknowledging that you appreciate the work that informal peacemakers do goes a long way, because they actually make your life better if you can find out who are the informal peacemakers. These are some of the themes in informal peacemaking. People get involved. It's not part of their job description. They provide places for people to tell their stories. They help people reframe their situations, and they are oftentimes women. So this is something that you should be seeking out, or who are your informal peacekeepers in the group. Common conflict management outcomes. Well, are the problems getting solved, and are the relationships getting repaired and or transformed? So this is why I believe that conflict is actually good in an organization, because problems will emerge all the time, and relationships people get their feelings hurt. And so if a conflict works, problems do get solved, and people actually do get their relationships transformed. So let me stop there, and I'll take some questions. I think I went over my
We're
30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sandra.
Okay, good.
It is now time to turn to questions from our audience. I would actually encourage this audience to use the phone. Conflict problems tend to be somewhat complex, and I think it will be easier to ask your question on the phone than to type it in. Dick, would you please remind people how to do the phone-in questions?
Yes, and you can have a question or make a comment. All you have to do is press star and the number 1 on your telephone's keypad. And then when your turn comes up, I'll call on you by the name of your city. And if you're on a speakerphone, please get as close to the phone as you can so we can all hear you better. And so if you have a question, go ahead and press star 1 now. And if you want to submit a written question, you can click on Q&A on the menu bar at the top of your screen, type in the question, and then click on the word ask. And we have one question coming from Pomona, California. Welcome to the program.
Okay, thank you. My question is, what to do if there's a person who's always working on alliances, say, against another person, that he's always trying to get other staff members or other faculty to sort of turn all on one person? How do you combat that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, there's a term for that. We call it triangulation. And it actually needs to be dealt with directly. But interestingly, this person is not the only one who triangulates. Almost all humans triangulate. We're very social creatures, and we like to talk about other people.
Sure.
And my experience, the best way of dealing with this is to bring this to the group and say, how do we want to deal with talking about each other to other people? Because we all do it, and we all feel guilty about it. Some of us do it more than others. But the problem with triangulation is that it it starts to form coalitions, and it misrepresents, usually misrepresents what the third person, the third person who's hearing about it doesn't really know what's going on. They're just getting it from the second person. So what the first person then really is thinking or feeling or saying doesn't get a say in that. So I think if you actually bring it to the attention of the group and ask the group what they think they ought to do about it, then you have a group norm about that behavior, so that when it occurs the next time, say, wait, remember we promised we weren't going to do this anymore. Is that helpful?
A little bit, but then if they figure they can't bring it to the group, maybe they'll call the police or they'll use other avenues. And you can't say, no, you can't call them
okay,
because of that behavior.
Can you say a little bit more about it? It sounds like it's escalated.
Well, I would say so. But then you call the police come in and they said, this is not a legal problem. There is no legal issue here.
So it's an interpersonal, you got one person against another one and they're trying to form a group against him or her?
Right.
That needs an intervention from the next, or is it within a department as a faculty member?
It's within a department. Yeah, staff members, really.
Staff, yeah. Issues of staff are interesting, are a little different than faculty in the sense that staff are on contracts and faculty have appointments, and so you have a little more leverage with staff in the sense that I don't know if it's a chair or a director over the staff, but whoever the person is that the staff members report to need to start with sitting down having a conversation, and I would probably start with talking to person A and then talking to person B separately, and then bringing A and B together and say, this is what I see is going on here. I'd like to have a conversation, and so that you are facilitating a conversation, dialogue between them. And let me get up this slide right here. So, and see if you can get them to negotiate how they're going to work together. They don't have to like each other, and they don't have to do anything socially together, but how are they going to work together that won't infringe upon the rights and privileges of other members of the department? And that you, as the leader, are not going to anymore accept their infringing upon the rights and privileges of other members of the department. So they've got to figure out what they're going to do about it. This is, by the way, not uncommon. I bet I've been on 50 campuses where this has been at the heart of the issue of a staff or two. It's down to two people, and the unit doesn't know what to do with these two people. And one feels more of a victim of the other.
All right. Well, and thank you for that. Did that answer your question in Pomona?
I think so, yes.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on. San Diego, California. Welcome to the program.
I hate you folks out there in the sunny land. Seems unfair.
I'm not going to tell you what the weather's like here.
Don't tell me. We're in snow.
I was wondering if you had any particular advice about how to deal with generational conflict.
I'm sorry, how to deal with what? I can hardly hear you.
Let me get up and I'll get closer to the phone. Hold on.
You said, do I have any advice about dealing with, and then I didn't get the last of it.
I got closer to the phone.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any advice about how to deal with generational conflict between junior faculty members and senior faculty members, either in a department or in a larger academic unit like we're the College of Arts and Sciences here? Do you have anything in particular you might share with us about that particular situation?
Yeah, I think there's some. This is an interesting problem, pretty pervasive, and there are some creative ways that people have handled it. First of all, changing our language. I think if we talked about early career and later career faculty, it can remind the later career that they used to be there at one point too, and it reminds the early career folks that they're on a trajectory to ultimately become later career faculty. So I think the junior and senior has a kind of hierarchical feel to it, where early developmental model seems less oppressive. The other thing is that there are different needs and interests of folks in various stages in their academic career. And so at the beginning, in the early career, what never goes away is their worry about getting tenure. And so all their dancing that they're doing is trying to figure out ways to make sure that what they're doing, they're getting the right publications, they're getting access to the right people, they're getting good journals, and so on. And they're probably technologically pretty savvy, and they probably are pretty comfortable with ways that the youth today communicate, and they think of themselves as different from senior faculty or later career faculty. And so those departments that have done well have figured out a way to set up a buddy system where for the first 3 years that you're not, if you're the tenure track, or even if you're on term faculty, that here are 1 or 2 faculty members who will help you navigate the university system. And that you honor the senior faculty as, quote, university citizens, where part of their later career task is to bring the next generation along. So that they see that it's not a divide, but that they're actually helping the process in this kind of developmental process. And and then I'll say one more thing, and then I'll open it back up again. It reframes the notion that there are these 2 groups, or maybe 3 groups with the mid-career folks, but it's usually 2 groups, and that they are opposed to each other, as opposed to the department needs them all. And there's reasons why we like new blood, new generation, new ideas, and new thinking. The other thing is to set up structures that make them talk to each other. So on the curriculum committee should be an early career faculty member and a mid-career faculty member and a more senior person. So you could set up important meetings where they have voice. All the groups have voices. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Okay.
Sandra, we have a question that has come in, or it's actually a request. It's asking that you have a little bit of time to talk about appreciative inquiry.
Oh, goody. Can I give me 3 minutes on it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So appreciative inquiry is a kind of a research methodology that I love, and if you even try it out in your interpersonal life, you're going to find that it changes the way you are in the world. And this is how it works. It comes out of Case Western Reserve. That there's a whole unit of folks who created this thing called appreciative inquiry. And it starts with a group, when you're working with a group, of having them think of an experience when things went really well for them. For example, let's say we're in a department and you've got some curmudgeons in the department and you've got some people who are doing this triangulation and, you've got all these problems and you're thinking, oh, I can't stand these people. And someone comes in and says, what was the department like when you were working in a group that worked for you? And give people really time to think about that, a time and experience when something really worked. And then share those stories. And what happens in that process is that because it's grounded in real life experience as opposed to, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had this utopian kind of department, everybody loved each other. When people start saying, the reason I love this department is because every morning we had coffee together, or people always checked in, or we always went out to beer on the first Friday of such and such. Whatever the reason is, it opens up and it allows the members to imagine behaving differently. And so whenever I get into it, when I'm working with a group that's in a pickle, I'll say, okay, so we know how to hate each other. Let's just park that for a while. And what was the time when in any instance when something really worked for you? And that actually turns it from problem solving. The appreciative inquiry is exactly the opposite of problem solving. You start, rather than what's the problem, it says what worked. And then how do you think we could get that to work here? And then you move back to problem solving. So that's just a sneak preview. You ought to Google appreciative inquiry, get a good book on appreciative inquiry, and it'll change your life. I'll stop on that. Anything else?
Dick, do we have any more questions on the line?
We've got 3 in the queue at the moment. Let's go to Norfolk, Virginia. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I have a question here. part of the university is undergoing some restructuring, and that means that for the common good of the university and the students, certain units are going to need to work together in ways that haven't worked together before. And, you know, to be blunt, we're seeing some resistance from at least one of those units that doesn't want to be a part of this new structure. How do you, you know, what would be some of your suggestions for helping the more resistant group to come into the fold, as it were?
Well, I mean, I think change always brings resistance. We are pretty predictable cats. You can, things that we do every day, we probably did 10 years ago every day. And so when change comes along, we begin to resist. And then when change is imposed on us, we'll even resist more. And so when change is dependent, and when our salary is dependent on it, you know, you're upping the ante. And so people are going to feel like victims and abused, deeply abused. Now, that's the extreme case. But that always goes with reorganization. So when I say you sort of anticipate remember that anticipate the problems, what you have immediately is a structural conflict because people have been comfortable, even if it hasn't worked, people have been comfortable and know how to navigate one structure. So I would start with, rather than being upset with the department that's resisting that, I would go and say, I would work with them to say, what would it take, this actually, a appreciative inquiry would work with this, what would it take for this to work for you and under these new conditions? What, you know, what do you see as would make this, how could I put this, what, we're reorganizing for these kinds of reasons. And I'm assuming your reorganization has some logic to it. Yeah. So we're reorganizing in these kinds of ways. And this is the reason that we're doing this, and it's supposed to solve these kinds of problems. And we know that you're not happy about this. What do you see would work for you? And if they say, well, what would work for me is to go back to the way it was, say, well, we're not able to do that because, and you go back to the rationale for why you're doing the reorganization. And if your reorganization isn't willy-nilly, you probably have some really good reasons for doing the reorganization. And say, and probably earlier on they should have been involved in the process of thinking about the reorganization. But since whether they were or not, now what you need to do is to say, what would it take for you to cooperate with this? Because, and then find out what's on their mind. I mean, I think a good conversation starts it. And then if they keep resisting and resisting and resisting, then it needs to be ratcheted up to saying, what do I have to do in order for you to stop resisting this? Because even faculty are tenured and, you know, think they have a life contract, ultimately have to behave. They ultimately report to somebody, you know. So you can, what's interesting about organizational conflict as opposed to community conflict is you have leverage. In the community, you know, with neighbors, you don't have a lot kind of leverage of, you know, the boss coming in, but you do have leverage in a department or a unit or a provost or a president, and people can respond to that. But I'd start earlier on with just basic communication, sort of like, what is it you're worried about? What do you think you're going to lose out of this? And so on.
Yep. Good.
All right, and thank you for that. We've got, we're really getting short on time. Prairie View, Texas, you've got about 30 seconds. Go ahead with your question.
I have a question. What do you...
You'll have to get closer to your phone. We cannot tell what you're saying.
I'll relay it.
Okay.
I'll relay it for you.
Okay, what do you do with a staff person who wants to be a boss?
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Can you get a little closer?
I'm taking her question and I'll repeat it. Just
okay, great.
Okay.
And the pricing, there's no stop in the pricing because they can't work with their co-workers.
Okay. Her question is, what do you do when you have a staff person who wants to be the boss in an area and there's just no stopping them? They just don't get along with their coworkers. And the supervisor.
And they don't get along with the supervisor?
Yes.
Whoa. Okay, so I think there's two pieces in here. You said they want to be the boss. They obviously have a lot of talent and a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you redirect it? Can you say something along the line of, there are lots of things that need to be done here. You've got lots of energy, and is there one of these projects that you would like to take on and put your thumbprint on it? That would be one, sort of begin to say, we've got lots of needs, you've got talent, let's see if we can match the needs with the talent. Along with that, you could actually partner and say, listen, one of the problems we have ongoing around here is your inability to work with your colleagues, and this is a collaborative department, and we need to be thinking in terms of what's going to happen if you can't collaborate. Now, I see one possibility is that you could take on some specific projects, and I will give you some leverage to do that, but that doesn't mean that that gives you permission not to get along with people, that you have to at least give efforts to demonstrate civility. And I don't think
Thank you very much,
I don't think a unit needs to apologize for demanding civility of its members.
I want to thank Sandra for an excellent presentation and our audience for very thoughtful questions. Today's presentation has been recorded and is available to you, will be available to you in a couple of days in streaming format. It'll be available for 30 days without additional charge to you. You can consult the handout materials for the URL for this streaming version. If you'd like to purchase a copy of CD of this presentation, you may do so at the KRM website for an additional charge. I'll pass the program back to you, Dick, for any final wrap-up.
All right, and thank you. And this does conclude our presentation today. Now, as you can see, your computer's been directed to an online evaluation form for today's program. We ask that you take a moment to let us know your thoughts and also let us know what other topics or information would be valuable to you. Today's program is copyrighted in 2011 by the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, all rights reserved. And I would like to thank you all very much for joining us today. This does conclude the presentation. You may now hang up your phone and enjoy the rest of your day.